Good morning, Colorado. You are listening to the Daily Sun Up. It's a conversation with the Colorado Sun. I'm team editor David Krause. Before we jump into today's conversation, here is a quick message from our sponsor.
When your number one fan is your number one threat. Stephen King's iconic thriller Misery is live on stage at the Arvada Center this fall. Tickets are on sale today. Running September 4th through October 11th, visit arvadacenter.org for tickets today. Set the summer trend. Electrify your lawn equipment and help reduce harmful ground-level ozone in your Front Range community. Learn more at simplestepsbetterair.org.
Now, back to the show.
Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm John Ingold. I'm the healthcare reporter here at the Colorado Sun. Now, normally this is the time when I would be joined by Michael Booth, our wonderful climate and environment reporter, to talk about our latest stories. But this week at the Sun, we are doing our annual planning retreat, which will help us provide better service and better coverage to readers for years to come. So we are going to offer you a replay of a podcast that first ran back on May 21st. Our reporter, Shannon Mullane, she covers water for us, speaks with an author about his book called Life After Dead Pool, which makes the case for essentially draining Lake Powell. We're now in August. This is still relevant because Lake Mead, which of course connects to Lake Powell and is also the largest reservoir in the United States, recently hit its lowest level on record. So these water issues continue to be important to study and important to understand. We hope you'll enjoy it, and thanks very much.
Thanks for listening today. I'm Shannon Mullane, the water reporter for the Colorado Sun, and I'm happy to be joined by award-winning author and environmental journalist Zach Podmore for today's episode. Hey, Zach, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on the show today.
Oh, doing great. Zach, your 2024 book, Life After Dead Pool, explores Lake Powell's past history and controversies and its current challenges, but it also posits a different idea for its future, draining Lake Powell entirely. So you really dive into this idea that Glen Canyon Dam, which creates Lake Powell, can and should be modified or changed or retired in some way. So can you tell me a little bit, what are the main arguments in favor of retiring Glen Canyon Dam?
Yeah, the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam in the late 50s and early 60s was one of the most famous environmental controversies and tragedies for some in the history of the Southwest, especially for the environmental groups that were becoming more powerful in the 1960s, like the Sierra Club. It was widely publicized as a mistake that flooded what would almost certainly be a national park today under Lake Powell. By all accounts, Glen Canyon, which was over 150 miles long, was as beautiful as the Grand Canyon and would have a similar kind of visitor pool and recreation as the Grand Canyon does today. But of course, the Glen Canyon Dam was built, Lake Powell started filling in 1963, and 186 miles of the Colorado River was flooded, and it became one of the premier houseboat destinations in the world. Lake Powell is an incredibly beautiful place to houseboat and do reservoir recreation. So throughout all of this history for the last 60 plus years, there's been people making an environmental argument for decommissioning the Glen Canyon Dam, restoring Glen Canyon, this what's sometimes referred to as America's Lost National Park. But the conversation has shifted since the 1990s when that environmental argument wasn't being taken very seriously in water management circles. Lake Powell was last full in 1999, and it appeared to be working as intended. The Glen Canyon Dam was generating hydropower. There were millions of people recreating on Lake Powell every year. Lake Powell was storing a lot of water during dry years and capturing water during wet years and releasing it during dry years. And everything was going more or less according to the plan that was set out from the dam builders in the 60s. That's really changed over the last 26 years. Lake Powell has been in decline, and it's in danger of hitting its record low levels in the coming weeks or months. We're just above a level on Lake Powell known as minimum power pool when hydropower generation stops, which is also being referred to by people like the journalist Jonathan Thompson as de facto dead pool. It's the lowest safe elevation Lake Powell can get to without having major concerns about the integrity of the Glen Canyon Dam. So there's still this environmental argument for decommissioning or retiring Glen Canyon Dam and restoring the Colorado River to Glen Canyon. But now there's a very forceful water management argument for why the Glen Canyon Dam should be modified or upgraded to allow us to empty Lake Powell completely in an emergency. So we're getting very close to a situation where there's nearly 6 million acre feet of water trapped in Lake Powell with no easy way to get it out and downstream into the Grand Canyon. And that's a huge concern for everyone who relies on water from the Colorado River, especially the 27 million people who get water from the Colorado River below the Glen Canyon Dam.
So, and I have also heard a little bit about a silt glacier. Can you talk about some of that and some of the ecological factors involved in this conversation?
Yeah, the Colorado River is named after its red color from being a very muddy river. The San Juan River, which flows into Lake Powell as well, carries an incredible amount of sediment. And all of that sediment from both rivers has been trapped in Lake Powell since 1963. So there's about 7%, more than that now, of the entire storage capacity of Lake Powell has been replaced with sediment. It used to be water, now it's sediment there. It's the equivalent of, a large mountain of mud and silt and sand that's kind of spread out through the upstream reaches of Glen Canyon. And that sediment plume that is being pushed down further and further into Lake Powell every year by the Colorado and San Juan rivers has been compared to a glacier. It's 200 feet thick in places. The river is flowing on top of it. The river gets incredibly muddy from picking up that sediment and carrying its natural load of sediment. And then it hits Lake Powell and it drops most of that sediment right there. So that kind of creates the situation where there's a underwater glacier of mud advancing down the canyon. But that glacier is still over 120 miles from Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado side. So if Lake Powell were to disappear tomorrow, you would see a lot of sediment in the upstream reaches of the reservoir, which is already there. But you'd see very little sediment in the heart of Glen Canyon itself. But the longer we wait to deal with this issue of a dam that's no longer serving its intended purpose, the further and further that silt pushes into Glen Canyon.
Let's talk about the other side of the aisle. This is a big conversation. It's been going on for decades. People have opinions on it and arguments for and against the idea. So when we're thinking about the perspectives and arguments against modifying or retiring the dam, what are the main ones that come up?
Well, I'd say that the voices that are loudest for trying to figure out how to add more water to Lake Powell is the recreation lobby at this point. As I mentioned earlier, millions of people enjoy reservoir recreation on Lake Powell, and that is seriously endangered already by the hydrology we've been seeing in the Colorado River Basin, the declining snowpack, but also would, of course, be impacted by any attempts to modify or retire the Glen Canyon Dam. The upper basin states in the Colorado River Basin, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, all have an interest in trying to preserve Lake Powell as well. It's kind of Lake Powell is seen as the upper basin's major storage reservoir. There's no major diversions from Lake Powell. It doesn't supply any farms. It only has a very small municipal diversion to the town of Page and a chapter of the Navajo Nation, around 7,000 people total, I believe. And it's the second largest reservoir in the country. So that's not its intended purpose, is to supply the town of Page with water, and there are other options for them to get water. So I think there is a shift happening in the arguments over whether or not this dam has a future or what that future looks like. And the people who enjoy recreating there certainly have an interest in trying to keep the status quo. But for the upper Colorado River Basin states, I think there is the potential, even if we haven't seen that yet, for some flexibility in how water is managed, how water is delivered from the upper to lower basin, and some potential for changes to what has been the status quo for many decades at this point. But I will say that, even though the situation on Lake Powell is growing more dire, there are the discussion around modifying the dam is still not quite out in the open. The lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada, have all requested that a study be done to see what it would take to modify the dam to avoid this issue of dead pool on Lake Powell. And very powerful farmers in the Imperial Valley of California have said this is something that needs to happen as well. So it's certainly in the mainstream. There's 3 big states in the Colorado River Basin that are asking for the first step to be taken in this direction, but it's not something that is being, broadcast by the Bureau of Reclamation itself. Nobody in the water management world really wants this issue to be coming to the fore. Everyone wishes there was good snow, from water managers to water users and skiers and everybody else. But since we've had such bad snow years for most of the last 25 years, it's becoming an issue we can't ignore any longer, because once we hit that de facto dead pool level on Lake Powell, you enter a situation where there's a lot of water trapped in Lake Powell with no way to access it. Most of the boat ramps are closed on Lake Powell at that point, all but one, and hydropower is greatly diminished, and there's just this pretty useless reservoir in the middle of the system that's kind of clogging up the works as things grow drier, and you risk hitting dead pool on Lake Mead on the Hoover Dam as well, which would be catastrophic. So it's an issue that most people wish wasn't being forced upon us, but it is growing worse and worse every year, and we're really hitting a critical juncture in 2026.
Right. And I mean, for our listeners and readers, they've probably seen Lake Powell and Glen Canyon Dam in the headlines for the past few years. I've been covering what is happening with this dam. It's coming up as part of the conversations between the states about how to manage the river going forward. And like you mentioned, we have been having historically bad winters. Like this year is a record-breaking poor snowpack. And so you talked a little bit about this. Maybe you can expand on it a little more. Are the current conditions changing this conversation? You mentioned the lower basin has some interest in a study. Have you heard interest in that from any other parties?
Some environmental groups have been pushing the idea of filling Mead first. It's often called, for a long time, Glen Canyon Institute in Salt Lake City was working on this issue decades ago. Their idea is that we should keep Lake Powell as low as possible and fill Lake Mead as much as possible in order to allow the restoration of Glen Canyon to continue, which is something we haven't talked about too much. But basically, today, if you were to move all the water from Lake Powell, the second largest reservoir in the country, to Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the country, Lake Mead would be less than 2/3 full. So we have plenty of storage in the system to work with, and Lake Powell really just delays the transfer of water downstream. So we said there's not really any diversions from Lake Powell, unlike Lake Mead, which supplies the city of Las Vegas and all the infrastructure downstream. So there's folks in the environmental community that are very excited about the possibility of restoring Glen Canyon, and now the hydrology is pushing us in that direction. There are acres of land that were flooded by Lake Powell in 1999 that have since been re-exposed, some of them for 26 years continuously now, and we have a really good sense for what ecological recovery in these areas would look like because we have this 26-year track record. And at the highest elevations of a lot of these tributaries into Glen Canyon, there's beautiful flowing streams in a lot of these canyons, and 50, 60-foot tall cottonwood trees have returned. There's beaver dams, there's fish in the ponds, there's frogs hopping around, there's blankets of wildflowers. Native species are out competing invasive species without any active human management. This is happening on its own. And it's really, a paradise down there if you get to these areas that have had 10, 15, 20, 25 years to recover. And that, gives me a lot of hope, and people have been following this issue a lot of hope for what the recovery of Glen Canyon would look like as a whole if it's allowed to happen.
So we're heading into our last questions for today, but I'm so curious. When you were doing the research for your book, did you have any wild experiences or anecdotes that swayed you in any particular position, toward any particular position? I know that you grew up rafting and you've kayaked these rivers. But yeah, while you were doing your research, what compelling moments happened that swayed you the most?
Yeah, I got involved with this issue originally, or became a water reporter of some sort, because I did a 4-month, 1,700-mile source-to-sea kayak trip down the Green and Colorado rivers right after I graduated from college in 2011. We started in the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming and ended up in the former delta of the Colorado in Mexico. And that was the first time I started thinking about our rivers and our water infrastructure as more of a whole. I'd grown up, as you mentioned, running rivers through beautiful canyons in Utah, but I didn't know where the rivers went after that. So I think the most powerful thing for me from that trip was seeing the Green River start as a little alpine stream and grow into a giant river in the middle of the Grand Canyon, and then below the Grand Canyon start to shrink back down to a stream before it dries up completely at the U.S.-Mexico border. And there's a lot of benefits from how we use water in the Southwest. The Colorado River supplies water to 40 million people, but there are also pieces of the system that aren't working as well as they were once intended to work. And the Glen Canyon Dam is the major example of that. So I think the research really helped me see that the future of Glen Canyon is not as depressing as I once thought. I just assumed it'd be full of trash and mud if Lake Powell were to dry up all at once. There is some of that, but the recovery is so swift that it offers an incredible opportunity for us to improve our water management in the Southwest while also restoring this lost national park.
This is a compelling idea for some. It might be more controversial for others. It's part of the rivers conversation, though, right now. And of course, this year we do have some big water news happening with negotiations between states, like we talked about, for how to manage the river's future. So as you go forward further into 2026, what are you keeping your eye out for? What's happening next?
Well, I'll be curious to see what the fallout is from the emergency actions that are being taken to protect the elevation in Lake Powell right now. There's water being sent from Flaming Gorge Reservoir to Lake Powell to help stabilize elevations in Lake Powell. It's not going to refill Lake Powell by any stretch, but it's going to keep the level more constant. There's a huge reduction to water releases into the Grand Canyon from the Glen Canyon Dam. And this situation that I wrote about in my book, which was mostly researched a few years ago, is happening this year, where we're reaching this minimum viable elevation on the Glen Canyon Dam. And I'll be curious to see if that results in an approval for funding for this study of what it would take to modify and upgrade and improve the Glen Canyon Dam to avoid this issue of dead pool on Lake Powell. And that's something that could happen soon and is growing more urgent by the day, because we don't want to end up in this situation where we have a lot of water in the system while taps or canals start to go dry and we can't get that water out.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. If anyone wants to read more about water in Colorado and across the West, you can go to our homepage or check out Zach's book, Life After Dead Pool. Thank you so much for the chat today, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks for listening. And finally, here are a few stories that you should know about today.
Colorado's high country towns are cutting budgets after a slow winter pinched critical sales tax revenue. Spending in 18 Colorado mountain towns fell in the winter of 2025-26, reaching a 4-year low. It's the second winter in a row that the 18 communities have seen wintertime declines in the net taxable sales tracked by the state. A trade group is suing Colorado to stop a statewide recycling expansion based on a fee charged to consumer packaging companies. The National Association of Wholesaler Distributors argues the law gives them no voice in how the fees are used and violates their First Amendment rights to show consumers the costs. The Aspen School District has discovered a potential source of geothermal energy 1,000 feet under a high school football field. A test drill shows the site could support ground-source geothermal heat pumps that circulate water deep underground to provide heat in the winter and air conditioning in the summer.
To read these stories and much more, visit our website, coloradosun.com. As an award-winning nonprofit news outlet, we take our mission of credible, independent journalism seriously, and you can check out our trust indicators at coloradosun.com/ethics. Our music is by the Denver-based Matt Skellinger Group. A link to their music is in our show notes, and a special thanks to Swallow Hill Music. I'm David Krause. See you next time.